What you're about to hear is one of the darkest chapters in human history. This is the story of a man whose actions led to the deaths of over 70 million people, including 6 million Jews systematically murdered in what we now call the Holocaust. This isn't entertainment. This is education. Understanding how Adolf Hitler rose to power, the atrocities he committed, and the warning signs that allowed it to happen is crucial so that history never repeats itself. I'm not here to sensationalize evil. I'm here to explain how a failed art student became the architect of humanity's most industrialized genocide. So let's dive into the complete story of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small town on the Austrian-German border. He was the fourth of 6 children born to Alois Hitler and Clara Perlzel, though only he and his sister Paula survived to adulthood. His childhood was far from happy. His father, Alois, was a customs official, strict, authoritarian, and often violent. Young Adolf was frequently beaten by his father, creating a deep resentment that some historians believe shaped his later authoritarian personality. His mother, Clara, on the other hand, doted on him, perhaps overcompensating for his father's harshness. Here's a lesser-known fact. Hitler's father was born illegitimate, with the surname Schicklgruber. He didn't take the name Hitler until he was 39 years old. Imagine if history remembered Heil Schicklgruber. It almost sounds absurd, but that was nearly reality. As a teenager, Hitler dreamed of becoming an artist. He spent hours drawing and painting, convinced this was his calling. In 1907, at age 18, he applied to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna and was rejected. He applied again in 1908, rejected again. The Academy told him his work showed unfitness for painting and suggested he try architecture instead, but he lacked the academic credentials. This rejection devastated him. Some historians speculate this failure, combined with the death of his mother from breast cancer in December 1907, sent him into a downward spiral. He spent the next few years essentially homeless in Vienna, living in flop houses, selling postcards and paintings to survive. Vienna in the early 1900s was a breeding ground for anti-Semitism and nationalist fervor. The young, aimless Hitler absorbed these ideas like a sponge. He spent his days reading anti-Semitic pamphlets and nationalist newspapers, attending political rallies, and developing his toxic worldview. Here's where his hatred truly crystallized. Hitler blamed Jews for everything: the loss of his artistic dreams, Vienna's social problems, the decline of German culture. These weren't rational beliefs. They were conspiracy theories that gave him someone to blame for his own failures. In 1913, he moved to Munich, Germany, to avoid Austrian military service. But when World War I broke out in 1914, he eagerly volunteered for the German army. Finally, he found purpose. Hitler served as a dispatch runner, carrying messages between units. Dangerous work. He was actually a decorated soldier, receiving the Iron Cross First Class, a rare honor for someone of his rank. He was wounded twice, including a mustard gas attack in 1918 that temporarily blinded him. When Germany surrendered in November 1918, Hitler was in a military hospital. He was devastated. He, like many Germans, believed in the stab-in-the-back myth, the conspiracy theory that Germany hadn't lost the war militarily, but had been betrayed by Jews and communists at home. This lie would become central to his political ideology. After the war, Germany was in chaos. The Treaty of Versailles imposed crushing reparations, hyperinflation destroyed the economy, and political violence was rampant. Into this instability stepped Adolf Hitler. In 1919, Hitler was assigned by the army to spy on a small political group called the German Workers' Party. Instead of spying, he joined it. He discovered he had a gift. He could speak. His speeches, filled with rage and passion, electrified audiences. He blamed Jews, communists, and the Versailles Treaty for Germany's problems, and people desperate for answers listened. By 1921, he'd taken control of the party, renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, and adopted the swastika as its symbol. In November 1923, Hitler attempted a violent coup in Munich called the Beer Hall Putsch. It failed miserably. He was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he only served 9 months. But here's the thing, this failure taught him something crucial. He couldn't seize power by force. He'd have to do it legally. In prison, he dictated Mein Kampf, My Struggle, a rambling manifesto laying out his ideology, extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, anti-communism, and his belief in Aryan racial superiority. It's a blueprint for everything that would follow. After his release, Hitler rebuilt the Nazi Party. He was a masterful propagandist, using modern techniques, mass rallies, radio, film, striking visual symbols. His chief propagandist, Joseph Goebbels, orchestrated campaigns that portrayed Hitler as Germany's savior. The Great Depression of 1929 was Hitler's opportunity. As unemployment skyrocketed and the economy collapsed, extremist parties gained support. In the 1930 election, the Nazis went from 12 seats in the Reichstag to 107. In July 1932, they became the largest party with 230 seats. The conservative elites thought they could control Hitler, use him for their purposes. On January 30th, 1933, President Paul Hindenburg appointed Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. They thought they'd tamed him. They were catastrophically wrong. Hitler moved with terrifying speed to transform Germany into a dictatorship. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building burned down. Hitler immediately blamed communists and used it as justification to suspend civil liberties. Many historians believe the Nazis set the fire themselves as a pretext for what followed. The Enabling Act, passed in March 1933, gave Hitler the power to enact laws without the Reichstag. Democracy was effectively dead. Within months, all other political parties were banned. Trade unions were destroyed, and the Nazi Party was the only legal party in Germany. The SS and Gestapo, the secret police, created a surveillance state. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Speaking against the regime could mean death. Concentration camps, initially for political prisoners, began opening in 1933. Dachau was the first. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of President and Chancellor, declaring himself Führer of Germany. The military swore a personal oath of loyalty not to Germany, but to Adolf Hitler himself. Here's a chilling hidden fact. Hitler never actually won a majority in a free election. The Nazis' best performance was 37% in July 1932. He came to power through political maneuvering, and then destroyed democracy from the inside. The Nazi persecution of Jews began immediately, but escalated systematically. In 1933, Jewish businesses were boycotted. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship and banned marriage between Jews and non-Jews. Jews were fired from civil service, banned from most professions, and excluded from German society. On November 9, 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, Nazi paramilitaries and civilians destroyed Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues across Germany and Austria. At least 91 Jews were murdered, 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps, and the Jewish community was fined 1 billion Reichsmarks for the damage. The world watched, but did little. Hitler also targeted other groups: Roma people, disabled individuals, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, political opponents, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war. The Nazis' ideology was one of elimination, removing anyone deemed inferior or threatening to their vision of a pure Aryan race. The T4 program, beginning in 1939, systematically murdered disabled children and adults in Germany, over 70,000 people. They called it mercy killing. It was murder, and it was a testing ground for the industrial murder that would come in the Holocaust. Hitler's foreign policy was aggressive from the start. He wanted to overturn the Versailles Treaty, expand German territory, and create Lebensraum, living space for Germans in Eastern Europe. In 1936, he remilitarized the Rhineland, violating the Versailles Treaty. Britain and France did nothing. In 1938, he annexed Austria, the Anschluss. The world protested mildly. Later that year, he demanded the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. At the Munich conference, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain chose appeasement, believing he'd secured peace for our time. Hitler took the Sudetenland, then seized the rest of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. Each time, the international community's weak response emboldened him further. On September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. This time, Britain and France declared war. World War II had begun. Hitler's military strategy, Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, used tanks, aircraft, and rapid movement to overwhelm enemies. Poland fell in weeks. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France followed in 1940. By June 1940, Nazi Germany controlled most of Western Europe. Here's a disturbing fact. Hitler personally made many military decisions, often overruling his generals. Early in the war, some of his gambles paid off, convincing him of his own military genius. This hubris would later contribute to Germany's defeat. The Holocaust, the systematic, industrialized murder of 6 million Jews, is Hitler's most horrific legacy. It began with ghettos in occupied Poland, where Jews were concentrated in horrific conditions. Then came the Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads that followed the German army into the Soviet Union, shooting over 1 million Jews in mass executions. But this method was deemed inefficient by Nazi leadership, so they developed something more industrialized. In January 1942, at the Wannsee Conference in Berlin, senior Nazi officials coordinated the final solution, the complete extermination of European Jewry. Death camps were built: Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek. Jews from across occupied Europe were transported in cattle cars to these camps. Upon arrival, most were immediately sent to gas chambers disguised as showers. They were murdered with Zyklon B poison gas. Their bodies were burned in crematoria. The entire process was designed for maximum efficiency. Those not immediately killed were worked to death, starved, subjected to medical experiments, or tortured. The cruelty was systematic and unprecedented in scale. Anne Frank, whose diary you may have read, died in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1945. She was one of 1.5 million children murdered in the Holocaust. 6 million Jews total. Millions of others, Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, homosexuals, Soviet POWs. Hitler rarely visited these camps himself. He didn't need to. He'd created a bureaucratic machine of death that operated with cold efficiency. He knew what was happening. He ordered it. This was his vision. Hitler's hubris became his downfall. In June 1941, he invaded the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, opening a second front. Despite early successes, the campaign stalled outside Moscow. The brutal Russian winter, massive Soviet resistance, and overstretched supply lines turned the tide. The Battle of Stalingrad, from August 1942 to February 1943, was a catastrophic defeat for Germany. Over 750,000 Axis soldiers were killed or captured. Germany would never fully recover. Meanwhile, the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Germany now faced enemies on all sides with greater industrial capacity and manpower. Hitler became increasingly erratic. He moved into the Führer bunker in Berlin in January 1945 as Allied bombing intensified. He was addicted to methamphetamine and other drugs administered by his doctor, Theodor Morell. His health deteriorated. He had tremors, possibly from Parkinson's disease, and was frequently ill. As the Allies closed in from the west and the Soviets from the east, Hitler refused to surrender. He ordered Germans to fight to the death, issued scorched earth policies to destroy German infrastructure, and blamed the German people themselves for failing him. In his mind, if Germany lost, it proved they were weak and deserved destruction. At April 1945, Soviet forces were fighting street by street through Berlin. Hitler was in his underground bunker, surrounded by a few loyal followers, detached from reality. On April 29, 1945, he married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in the bunker. They'd been together for years, but Hitler had kept the relationship secret, believing a wife would damage his image. On April 30, 1945, as Soviet soldiers fought within blocks from the bunker, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. Hitler shot himself with his pistol while simultaneously biting a cyanide capsule. Eva took only the poison. Their bodies were carried outside, doused in petrol, and burned by Hitler's staff as Soviet artillery thundered overhead. The remains were later found by Soviet troops, though Stalin kept Hitler's death secret for years, spreading disinformation that he'd escaped. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was over. The death toll? Over 70 million people worldwide, including 27 million Soviets, 6 million Jews, and countless others. Adolf Hitler was a monster, but he wasn't supernatural. He was a human being who exploited fear, scapegoated minorities, dismantled democracy, and led his nation into catastrophe. He rose to power because people underestimated him, because institutions failed, because hate speech went unchallenged, and because enough people were willing to follow him. The lessons of Hitler's rise in the Holocaust are clear. Defend democracy, resist authoritarianism, speak out against hatred and scapegoating, and never, ever believe that it can't happen here. Evil doesn't denounce itself. It creeps in through the cracks we leave open. Remember the victims, remember the warning signs, and never forget. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more history content. And remember, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.